For the past 7 years, Partners in Torah of Cleveland has touched the lives of tens of thousands of men, women, and children from all walks of Jewish life. Since March of last year, stay-at-home orders and quarantine requirements demanded virtual learning opportunities. Thanks to our advanced virtual learning platform at Partners Cleveland, we were able to help attendees in record numbers to connect with their Jewish heritage. During this crazy year, we even expanded our staff by welcoming Rabbi Jacoby to our growing family. We are anticipating, as soon as it is safe to do so, a new season of our popular monthly Shmorg program. All this bears a tremendous cost, and fundraising is more challenging than ever before. To that end, we will be conducting a 33-hour fundraising campaign via pledge.com beginning Sunday, April 25th. This campaign is the needed lifeline to help continue serving you and our community members with innovative programming. But we can't do it alone. We are inviting you to partner with us by volunteering some of your valuable time to help us reach our campaign goal. As a token of our appreciation for your time and effort, for every $250 you raise, we're going to enter you into our campaign raffle with over $4,000 of amazing prizes. Additionally, by raising $1,500, you will receive an ATG smartwatch and fitness tracker. Pledge.com enables you to make your very own fundraising page, customized with your name, fundraising goal, and personal link. You can choose a fundraising goal, but you don't have to meet the goal. And if you do meet the goal, the platform will automatically adjust itself to a higher goal. So let's get started. Take a minute to click on that link that we included with this video. You will then be asked to choose a fundraising goal. Your chosen goal will be doubled through our cumulative match. So if your fundraising goal is $1,000, put in $2,000. There will be a number of marketing materials such as social media posts, graphics, a call script, promotional videos, and more provided to help pave the way for you. So be sure to include the best email to reach you at and let us know whether or not you use WhatsApp. You do not have to wait until the campaign date to start soliciting donations. Your campaign page will be in pre-campaign mode as of April 20th, 5 days prior to the campaign. Dear friends, we need your help and support more than ever in reaching this goal. We cannot wait to celebrate the success of this important campaign with you. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you. Okay, good evening, everybody. It is such a pleasure to be back here with all of you at another fun-filled, wacky, wild, crazy week of Partners in Torah with Rabbi Landis. I'm your host, Rabbi Landis. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for signing on. And just to echo the words of that absolutely amazing video that we all just saw, we are getting geared up for our annual event. And for those of you who've been with us for the past number of years in annual events that we've done, you know that our annual events are quite, tend to be quite decent, if I do say so. And this one will be no exception. We're going to be having two absolutely amazing speakers. We're going to be having His Honorable Yosef Al-Taiba, who is the United Arab Emirates Ambassador to the United States, and a conversation with Malcolm Hoenlein, the immediate past president, or the past CEO, now the vice president of the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations of North America. And it's going to be an absolutely fascinating conversation. That's going to be April 25th. And that will kick off our annual fundraising campaign, which we're just like, in this crazy pandemic, or hopefully soon to be post-pandemic world, we're just like cramming it all in as much as we can. So we are going to do the whole campaign, raise our whole budget for the year, $300,000 in 33 hours. So, you can do your math. It's like, Dad, what is it? $10,000 an hour or something like that? I don't know, but maybe my math is off, but it's a lot of work to do. And we want to invite you to join us, to help us out, to build your own team, to sign up in that link we put in the chat box, make your own team, help us when the campaign starts, to reach out to your friends, family. Hey, you can even reach out to your enemies. That's fine with me too. And help us to raise this money to keep doing programs like we do here on Zoom, like we do through our podcast, like we do through our videos, and like God willing, we will do soon in person. And that is really how we're looking at our campaign this year. We're looking at our campaign really with two prongs. Number one, to be able to continue to do very high quality digital programming, because our take on this situation is digital programming is not going away anytime soon. So we want to continue to offer very high quality digital programming. But at the same time, once it's safe to do so, we want to be able to offer the same high quality in-person programming that we offered up until March of last year with the Shmorg and the Tuesday nights at the Federation and Torah on Tap for young professionals and the Lunch and Learns, and hopefully our educational trip itinerary, our trip schedules that we have planned and we'll hopefully be able to finally execute on. So we have a lot planned, and this campaign is how it's going to happen. And our only request today is, because the actual campaign hasn't started yet, is that you sign up to build a team to help us spread the word about the campaign. So you can click on that link there in your chat box and look forward to hearing a lot more about this over the course of the next 12 days until the actual campaign. So mark your calendar. It's going to be a lot of fun. With no further ado, let's dive right into today's topic. First of all, every one of these sessions is going to be pretty much self-contained, but if you happen to miss last week's session, you can get it at our website, www.torahcleveland.com, and you can just click on where it says the Jewish Destiny series and find the recording of last week's session. And as always, this will be available on torahanytime.com. And you can find this session and last week's session on torahanytime.com. So with no further ado, let's jump right in. Last week, we basically introduced the idea of why it's important to learn Jewish history. Today, we're going to actually start learning Jewish history. And the question is, where does Jewish history begin? And that's a great question, because first of all, we're going to have to define as we go on, what does the word Jew even mean? What does it, when we say Jew, what do we talk about? Therefore, when we talk about Jewish history, what are we talking about? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to have to define all these terms. But at least for tonight's discussion, as we really delve into Jewish history, where does Jewish history begin? That's the question I want to start with. So, to answer that question, we have to ask, what year are we in? Well, it depends on exactly what calendar you're using. If you're using the Christian calendar, or what you and I would probably more politically correctly call the secular calendar, we would say we're in the year 2021. Now, why I call that the Christian calendar is because that is based on Christian theology. They say that it's 2021 years since the birth of their Savior, the birth of their Messiah. That's why they call it AD, Anno Domini in Latin, which means the year of the Lord. So it's 2021 years from the year of the Lord. Before that, they call BC, before Christ. Before their Christ is Latin for Messiah. It's Mashiach in Latin. Before Mashiach, that's what they call BC. That has nothing to do with us. But again, that's the Christian Western world's perspective, that the world essentially started when Jesus was born, and everything before that, prehistoric, doesn't count. BC, before it's relevant, not our history. That's the approach of Christianity. That's the approach essentially of the Western world by using the Christian calendar. The Muslim world, it is the year 1442, right? Bet you didn't know that. Don't know if you had that marked on your wall. We are in the year of the Muslim calendar, or what's called the Hijra calendar, the year 1442. Now that is counting 1,442 years from Muhammad and his early followers' migration from Mecca to Medina, and it's what they mark as the beginning of their religion, the Muslim religion. Again, same perspective. We're 1,442 years from the creation of Islam. That's the beginning of history. Everything before that, ancient, prehistoric, doesn't count, not relevant, right? That's essentially what is, being a little tongue-in-cheek, but that is what is somewhat implied by those systems of counting years. We as Jews are in the year 5,781, or as we say it in Hebrew, Tav Shin Ayin Pei. Now, Tav Shin Ayin Pei goes back to that concept of gematria. It's Tav Shin Ayin Pei. If you take the gematria of those four letters, it equals 781, because we're in the year 781 of the fifth millennium, or really the sixth millennium, right? Yeah, 5,780. Okay, so we're in the year 5,781. The question is 5,781 years from what? That is a age-old question, a very famous question, an essential question, and it is the question that we need to answer if we are going to study Jewish history together. Because one thing is clear, if we are in the year 5781, then Jewish history, so to speak, began 5,781 years ago. So if Christianity starts history with the birth of Jesus, and Islam starts history with the beginning of the religion of Islam, what are we counting from? What event happened 5,781 years ago that we are counting our history from? So first off, we have to point out that the secret to this is really stated explicitly in Midrashic sources, explicitly in the Talmud, and basically explicitly in our Rosh Hashanah liturgy. Right, we talk about in our Rosh Hashanah liturgy, we mention Yom Haras HaOlam, that this is the birthday of the world, Zecha Maaseh Bereshis, the remembrance of creation. But then when we go on the liturgy, we really don't talk about creation at all. We talk about the creation of only one aspect of creation, and that was the creation of mankind. So let's narrow it down for a minute. It seems by looking at the liturgy, and this is really comes straight from Midrashic sources, from Vayikra Rabbah, from the Talmud, from elsewhere, that when we count 5,781 days, we are counting from the creation of man. Well, what does that mean? What do we mean creation of man? Well, if we believe in evolution and Darwin, so man really was created by like an ape or something like that, and that evolved to a Neanderthal, and that evolved to a man, and that evolved to more of a man, and now it's devolving back into apes, right? That's what we witness in the world today. But what point in history are we marking as the creation of man? It's a very hard thing to mark down. So let's try and understand exactly what. Let's try and understand exactly where we are going with this. So when we talk about the year 5781, we're counting from the creation of man. We'll say what that means in a minute. What about before that, right? What about before that? Well, the Torah begins not with the creation of man, right? There's 5.5 days, or really 5 days and about 6, 7, 8 hours that happened before man was ever created, right? And that was the creation of the whole entire world, what we call Sheshis Mea Bereshis, the 6 days of creation. What about that? Well, one thing is clear from what we're saying now, that is not included in the 5,781 years that we are talking about. So essentially we have two numbers here, that if we're looking at the length of Jewish history, the length of Jewish history is 5,781 years. And whatever it is, today's Rosh Chodesh Iyar, so that would put us at 8 months, 7 months, 1 day, whatever it is. 6 months and 1 day. But it's not only that, it's 5,781 years, 6 months and 1 day, and 6 days that came before that. So let's deal with those 6 days, and then we'll maybe get back into the 5,781 a little bit deeper. What does it mean when we're talking about 6 days of creation? And why are they not included in Jewish history, right? Because what I'm telling you is Jewish history began 5,781 years ago with some event that we mark as the creation of mankind, the beginning of mankind, okay? So what about the 6 days that came before that we are excluding from Jewish history for some reason based on the way that we are counting years? So one of the reasons we exclude it is because the Talmud tells us straight out to exclude it, right? The Talmud says, this is not part of your history. How do we know that? The Talmud in Masechta Chagiga, Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis at page 11, Yud Aleph Amud Beis at page 11b says, Ein Dorshin, Lo b'Maaseh Bereshis b'Shnayim, V'lo b'Rakama b'Yachid, Ella im kain hayachacham umevin mi daso. You should not expound, says the Mishnah, on the topic of creation before 2 or more individuals. In other words, it should only be more than 2 individuals. Really, I didn't write down the translation quite right. There should be no more than a threesome, meaning either 2 studying or 2 and a teacher. And what we call the Ma'aser Merkava, which in direct translation means the design of the divine chariot, but really what it means is the Kabbalistic metaphysics of the world. That should not be studied with more than one. In other words, only one-on-one, and only then from someone who understands it, who's wise and understanding, and all these matters on his or her own. Okay? So essentially what the Mishnah says, we'll get to the Kabbalah part, but it says basically the matters of creation, delving into trying to understand the concept of creation, should not be done in groups of two or more, right? It should only be a one-on-one study or two people studying with one teacher. That's how it should be done. So really we have a problem because we have, I don't know, about 17 people in the Zoom room here. We got probably, a couple tens more on Facebook and YouTube. We're going to have hundreds more on TorahAnytime.com later. So we're really in violation and delving into the story of creation because the Talmud tells us straight out, don't do it. It should only be done in very small groups. Now, why is that? Well, the reason is because it is a very hard topic to grasp, quite simply, right? In other words, what this Mishnah is essentially teaching us is we shouldn't get caught up on this concept of creation and how it works with the Almighty and how it works with mankind and metaphysics and all these things and how it all interplays together, because it's very, very, very hard to understand. In other words, this is one of the bases for what we understand as Kabbalistic learning, or, Kabbalah, as we've said, as I said many times before, is really just Jewish metaphysics, right? Physics is the study of the physical world. Kabbalah is the study of how the spiritual world interplays with the physical world. That's Kabbalah. So the Talmud tells us that when we start talking about the story of creation, we're delving deep into Kabbalah. And that is something that needs a very high level of knowledge, far beyond what I've achieved in my studies. Maybe some of you have gotten there. I haven't gotten there yet. And therefore, it shouldn't be taken lightly, and it should only be studied in a very diligent way and with very diligent practice, with tremendous concentration, with tremendous scholarship, etc., etc. And the Talmud goes on to tell us that we really shouldn't ponder too much about this unless we can give it that kind of attention, because that's the kind of attention this question warrants. Okay, so basically what we see from this, I believe, is twofold. Number one is we separate out essentially the 6 days of creation from Jewish history. That's prehistoric at that point, right? That's before history. History begins with the creation of mankind, with the creation of Adam and Eve. And why do we separate it out? Says the Talmud, because it's extremely difficult to understand and needs a very high level of scholarship to achieve at any meaningful level. Okay, so basically, that means that we have 6 days of creation before we start Jewish history. So how are we to understand those 6 days of creation? I mean, let's face it. We're living now in 2021, and everyone knows, based on what we've seen from the Hubble telescope, from all the space exploration, et cetera, all the research, everything, that the world, carbon dating and more, the world is anywhere from 14 to 16 billion years old. So what exactly are we talking about here when we say 6 days of creation? And really, the first clue that we should have that, so to speak, something's up, right? That there's more than meets the eye, is that we're separating it out from the rest of Jewish history, right? We so to speak put it on a different scale. We put it into a different counting zone before we start to count Jewish history. So how are we to understand this? So at its surface, we have a tremendous difficulty. Now, why? That is because if we look into the Torah and we look at the story of creation in the Torah, these 6 days that we're referring to, how much press is given to the creation story in the Torah? How much ink is given to the creation story? 31 verses, right? The whole creation story is given to us in 31 verses. Now, I once heard from Professor Gerald Schroeder, who we're going to quote in a little bit, that he is an MIT graduate, and he said in the MIT library when he was there in the 60s, there was no less than 50,000 books on the topic of creation. And down the road from MIT, and what's considered the world's best university library, the Harvard Library, he suspected there were upwards of 200,000 books on the topic of creation. And we have 31 verses, right? So one thing is for certain. in general, when we talk about the written Torah, and we've said this often, and it's a very important point to keep in mind, the written Torah is completely incomprehensible on its own. It makes no sense. You cannot digest it in any way, shape, or form, not the least of which it's not vowelized. So you can't even read it properly, right? The famous example of this is the verse, Lo savashel gedi b'chalav imo, which is how we read it, which translates as don't cook a kid in its mother's ches, lamed, vez. What does ches, lamed, vez translate as? Well, it depends how we punctuate it. It depends what kind of vowelization we give it. If we give it a certain vowelization, ches, lamed, vez, or ches, lamed, vet, means chalav, means milk. If we give it a different vowelization, it's chelev, which means fat. So which one is it? Do we not cook a kid in its mother's milk, or do we not cook a kid in its mother's fat? Each one having very different connotations, very different meanings in practice. Are we a low-fat religion, or are we a no milk and meat religion? If you look into the Torah, there's no way to know, because the Torah is given without vowelization. And there's many examples like that of literally change the vowels of the words, you get completely different meanings. So the Torah on its own is incomprehensible. And the creation story is a perfect example of that, because we have 31 verses to give to us what latter scholars have written upwards of 200,000 books on. Okay? So we're looking at very little from a Torah perspective. And when we talk about rabbinic perspective, it's in the realm of Kabbalah for the most part. It's in the realm of Kabbalistic thought. So it leaves a layman like you and me not a lot to understand. But one thing is interesting, just a couple points that are interesting on those 6 days as we see them, and that is that there's a concept called the order of creation, right? That if you look at these 6 days of creation, there's obviously an order of what was created first, second, third, on the first day, second day, third day, et cetera, et cetera. The order of creation, science to this day agrees with, right? If you look at any of the different studies on how things came into being, whether it's evolution or other studies of how the world came into being, they pretty much line up with our order of creation. There's not a lot of discrepancy there. Now you might say, okay, but it's simple logic. Well, wasn't always the case in the world, right? There were often many other creation stories that far different, give a far different order of creation than our creation story. And our creation story got it spot on, right? 3,300 years ago, got it spot on, right? Coincidence? I think not. But that's one thing we see, that the order of creation perfectly lines up with the concepts that we've seen from science. Now, the big question and the big difficulty is really this number of 6 days, right? That's what a lot of people get tripped up on. They're not bothered with order creation, because that lines up with science. And you know that there was seemingly chaos, and then chaos was brought to some sort of lack of chaos. And there was light, there was dark, there was water, there was animals, the plants, animals, etc. Okay, everyone's pretty okay with that. But what's up with these 6 days? What's up with the 6 days? How are we supposed to wrap our head around these 6 days? Now, the commentaries from the Talmud down through the main medieval commentaries, no one lightens the load on this for us. In other words, all of the commentaries, whether it's the Midrashim in the Talmud, whether it's Rashi, the Ramban, they all say that when the Torah says 6 days, it means 6 days. Don't think it's an allegory. Don't think it's just there to convey some crazy ideas. 6 days is 6 days, right? We have a concept of ein mikra yotze midei pshuto, that a verse does not go out of its simple meaning. And therefore, if the Torah talked about creation and the concept of 6 days, then it means 6 days, which really makes our job even harder, because our sages in the Talmud and the Midrashim, all the way down to all the main commentaries, Rashi, Ramban, all the major commentaries say 6 days means 6 days, right? It's not an allegory. It's 6 days. So how are we supposed to digest this and understand it based on science from any point of history, especially now when the length of the days, so to speak, or the length of creation has only gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, now towards the point of anywhere between 14 and 16 billion years. Okay, we're going to get to that in a minute. To get there, we have to understand a couple different things. What I'm saying here is what is taken as simple scientific fact for the most part in our modern scientific understanding. And I say modern scientific understanding because, as we all know, the science of today will not be the science of tomorrow in any way, shape, or form, right? Yesterday, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was okay. Today, it's not. But in a global sense, we've seen major changes in science. And one of those examples, one of the most major scientific shifts happened in the 1960s. What happened? Let's jump back right before the 1960s to appreciate what it was. In 1959, in Scientific America, which, one of the main Scientific American, one of the main science journals, a survey was taken amongst major scientists. And Scientific American wrote in 1959 on the question of what is or how old is the universe? What is the age of the universe, or how old is the age of the universe? Two-thirds of the scientists that were surveyed for Scientific American reported back, there is no age of the universe. The universe always was, always is, and always will be. In other words, this is, probably the most, one of the most influential people in the world, for sure. After Moshe Rabbeinu, after Moses, is Aristotle, and this is Aristotle's theory that really just held on until the late 20th century, as we're going to see. The idea of what Maimonides refers to as kadmus ha'olam, that the world always existed, and this was the Aristotelian philosophy that stuck with the world. 2,500 years after Aristotle, 2,300 years after Aristotle, whatever, 2,200 years after Aristotle, whatever it was still the working scientific theory. So in 1959, two-thirds of scientists surveyed by Scientific American believe in the Aristotelian theory that the world always was, always is, and always will be. Okay? Now, get two-thirds of anyone to agree on that. I mean, unless you live in Cuyahoga County and you're a Democrat, you don't see any political race where a candidate gets two-thirds of the vote. It just doesn't exist. I mean, to get two-thirds of the people surveyed for anything to agree on something, those are major numbers, 67%, right? Yet that's what, according to Scientific American, 67% of the scientists believed in 1959. The world always was, is, and always will be. Comes along 1965. Pincis and Wilson completed their famous study where they discovered the echoes in the universe of what we now call the Big Bang Theory, right? Using the Doppler effect of sound, they were able to determine that, right? We all know the Doppler effect, right? That's like that if you're, I grew up in the South. In the South, one of the major sports is college football. After that, it's NASCAR racing. So yes, I used to go to NASCAR racing on a regular basis with my father. And when you're sitting in the grandstands of a NASCAR race, what sound do the race cars make if they're coming towards you? They go, and what sound do they make if they're going away from you? They go, right? That's the Doppler effect of sound. And the Pincis and Wilson discovered in 1965, or in the 1965 findings that reported to the world, that the universe, through this Doppler effect of sound, they discovered that the universe was expanding. And that essentially, I don't know if it proved it. I don't know how science works, where you change a theory to a fact, where law becomes where theory becomes law. But it basically gave the Big Bang Theory a tremendous amount of credence, to where 6 years before, two-thirds of the scientists in the world did not believe in it. They believed that the universe always was. It was just spinning around, not expanding, staying the same, always was. That now the overwhelming majority of science shifts to the point where we are today, where the Big Bang Theory is accepted as close to scientific fact as you can get, right? So what's the Big Bang Theory say? The Big Bang Theory says that at one point in history, there was nothing, or there was a speck, right? A tightly, really condensed piece of nothing, right? Basically a piece of matter, if you will, or pre-matter. And that at one point exploded in the Big Bang. And that explosion is still going on as the universe expands and expands and expands. And eventually the pieces of this original speck started to come together and form atoms and molecules and neutrons and craters, not craters, but comets and planets and whatnot, until we had our galaxies and our solar systems and the planet Earth, et cetera, et cetera. That's what the Big Bang Theory says. Now, the Big Bang Theory worked great for us. Why? Because in 1959, the creation story was fairy tale. Because what did the creation story say? How did it start? How does it start? Everyone knows the beginning. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ves haaretz. In the beginning of creation, God created the heavens and the earth, right? In other words, creation had a beginning. So the scientific thinker in 1959, the Bible doesn't even get off the fairy tale shelf, because what do you mean? Aristotle said the universe always was, always is, always was, always will be. You say there was a point where it was all created. That doesn't make. You're not even getting to the God thing. You're not even getting to the theology thing. Just to say that there was a creation. Just to say that at some point the universe was not, and then the universe was. Right? The universe began. That was it was a non-starter for 2/3 of scientists in 1959. By 1965, that all flipped around, right? So first of all, a big lesson for us is that's why when we talk about science, and especially when we try and reconcile science and Torah like we're doing tonight, we have to go with a caveat that right now we're discussing it based on modern scientific knowledge. Tomorrow, as I think I saw Dr. Emmerman pop in here, tomorrow, as Dr. Emmerman and others can tell us, science will probably look completely different, right? There'll be other discoveries. We'll learn so much more. Things will change. The theories of today will be disproven for new theories of tomorrow, and we'll gain a much greater knowledge of things. And that's just how it works. But at least that was a very interesting change with the development of science, that essentially the concept of Bereshis bara Elokim, in the beginning of creation, that there was a beginning of creation. And I always say that the way we translate those words, Bereshis bara Elokim, into English is Big Bang Theory, right? That's essentially what it was. So, okay. With this basis of the Big Bang and understanding that the Big Bang just came to validate the creation, at least it got the creation story off the shelf, right? Off the shelf of the fairy tale to a certain extent. We'll be able to maybe take apart what we're supposed to understand from these 6 days. But we are at that famous halfway point where I always take a quick pause for questions. So if you have any questions at this point, please feel free to put them in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and pop in your questions. So Jan's making a very good point. Tonight is Yom HaZikaron, which is the Israeli Memorial Day, when we remember the fallen, those who've given their lives for the sake of the Jewish people in the land of Israel and abroad, because let's face it, they're fighting for us too. And so therefore our learning should be L'ilui Nishmas, for the elevation of the soul of those holy men and women who gave up their lives fighting for the freedoms of the Jewish people. So thank you, Joanne, for pointing that out. And you can go to that link there and make a donation for a specific soldier. Very, very important.
So what you do is you go in, you can either look for a soldier if you know somebody specifically, or it'll pop up and just give you a name, and you can choose. Do you want to learn in their honor? Do you want to give tzedakah in their honor? And there's another choice, and I'm totally blanking on what it is. And then you go and then do whatever. And then you can say to your friends, I just did this in honor of, and you can go do this too.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay, so any questions about what we said so far? So just the quick recap is that from a Jewish perspective, we count history as 5,781 years from the creation of man. And before that, 6 days of creation. And we're trying to take apart those 6 days of creation to come to some sort of understanding. Our first level of understanding is the Big Bang, right? That helped us understand it, because that essentially proved the idea. So any questions thus far, feel free to put them in the chat box now, or as we go, you can put them in the chat box, and then I will get to them when we pause again at the end. Okay. If not, we will keep on going. So I'd like to touch on a really fascinating work, but if it speaks to you, and if you have a somewhat decent understanding of physics and mathematics and these subject matters, then I would suggest you read this book. It is a very is a complicated book, especially if you don't follow the science and the mathematics of what he's talking about, of the quantum physics of this story. But there is a fascinating professor by the name of Dr. Gerald Schroeder, and he's written a number of books. The one that I linked there in the outline is called Genesis and the Big Bang. So we're going to touch on some of those topics tonight. He has another one, I believe, is called The Science of God. Again, his goal is to reconcile the modern understanding of science with classical Jewish thinking. As I said, we're not creationists. I want to make that very clear. I meant to say that before. the Christian creationist does not have the Talmud, does not have Kabbalah, does not have any of this. We're going to see from a lot of our commentators that for as deep as I've gotten in the subject, that we're told that even though 6 days means 6 days, that doesn't exactly mean what you think it means, right? Or 6 days means 6 days, but that doesn't mean what we think it means. And that's what we're going to delve into now. But if this subject really speaks to you, and again, you want to read a book that has a lot of physics in it, Genesis and the Big Bang, the discovery of harmony between modern science and the Bible. I believe some of you have read that book on my recommendation, and you can check that out. But anyways, let's delve in now to one of the ideas that he says in that book. So not only was the Big Bang Theory revolutionary for this attempt to reconcile Torah with science, but probably the other most earth-shattering discovery or theory is Einstein's theory of relativity, right? Einstein's theory of relativity came along and essentially gave us the answer to this question that we're delving into, as how we're supposed to understand these 6 days of creation and reconcile them with the 14 to 16 billion years that modern science says is the age of the universe. So what did Einstein's law of theory of relativity, what did it tell us, right? E equals mc squared is the famous theory. Many of us, if we're not scientists, don't really know what that means. But basically, for our purposes, it told us that it's not only space and matter, that it's time, space, and matter. That time, space, and matter are completely tied together. In other words, if you don't have matter, you don't have time, and you don't have space. The three are all tied together, right? If there's no space, there's no matter, there's no time, right? It's all tied together. No matter, no space, no time, right? It doesn't exist. In other words, there's the concept of, we talk about this in Jewish philosophy, of being above time and above space. That means essentially outside of the physical world, right? We talk about the Almighty being above time, above space, meaning not in the physical world, because there's no matter. And if there's no matter, there's no time, there's no space. That's what I'm oversimplifying for me, really, because it's the only way I can understand it. But that's what the theory of relativity told us together, that time, space, and matter are all intrinsically tied together. Once you have matter, you can have time and space. You don't have matter, you don't have time and space. Okay, that's what Uncle Einstein taught us all. He's part of the Mishpacha, so, nice Jewish scholar. So one of the other concepts that came out from the theory of relativity and from latter studies, especially of space travel, is the concept that the further out you get in the universe, the time moves, well, depending on which way you go, the time moves differently. For example, time moves faster on the moon than it does on Earth, and time moves slower on the sun than it does on Earth. Okay, that's one thing that Einstein told us, based on, again, density of matter or the amount of matter. You're going to have time moving either faster or slower. Okay, so along this idea, I want to throw in an idea that Nachmanides tells us on what we quoted before. So we quoted before this concept of when the Torah says 24 hours, a day, it means a day as we know it. It means a 24-hour day. That's what it means. But the Ramban, the great Kabbalist, one of the original Kabbalists, really adds a lot, a caveat on that. He says a day is a day is a day as we know it. But those days, meaning the days of creation, contain all the ages and secrets of the world. Very cryptic statement of the Ramban. These 6 24-hour days of creation contain within them all the ages and secrets of the world. So essentially, how we understand these words of the Ramban is, yeah, they're 24 hours, but it depends on your perspective. And the Ramban goes on to explain how creation happened, because Ramban was a great Kabbalist. It explains how creation happened. How did this first day of creation, what did it look like, so to speak? What is the Jewish tradition, the Kabbalistic tradition, as to what this first day of creation looked like? Says the Ramban, and the Ramban, by the way, we have to give his year, 13th century Spain. or Israel. He was expelled from Spain to Israel after his great disputation with Pablo Cristiani. But 1200s, 13th century scholar, Kabbalist. Okay, so he writes that the way the creation happened is that there was this speck, right? He says there was a speck, and that speck contained in it, and he goes on to describe, was smaller than a mustard seed, smaller than small could be. And he said that speck contained in it everything necessary to build a world. And that speck eventually turned into matter as we know it. And once it turned into matter, time grabbed hold of it, and the matter continued to expand. Sounds a little bit similar to our Big Bang Theory at some level, although it was, written about 700 years before the Big Bang Theory. That's what Nachmanides says. So Nachmanides, it took Einstein to bring this out for the scientists, but Nachmanides was saying this from Kabbalistic literature, many hundreds of years before Einstein, that matter and time are completely intrinsically tied, and time doesn't take hold till matter starts to expand, and the matter continues to expand. Okay? Now, I want you to imagine for a moment that we go on a trip, right? Let's imagine that we're, 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years down the road, whatever it is. And by that point, Elon Musk has made a lot more scientific advances than he's gotten to today, right? He's colonized Mars. We can get there in a short period of time. Kanye West is governor. No, maybe I hope that's not true, but whatever it is, he's made all his advances, and space travel is a thing, and we're all busy with it, and we can get to distant parts of the galaxy in a matter of no time. Okay. So through Elon Musk's new invention, we're able to go to a very far place of the galaxy where time moves at a different pace than it does on Earth, similar to how we mentioned the sun and the moon. On this distant star, this distant planet, we'll call it Muskville, the distant planet of Muskville, when 2 years pass on Earth, only 3 days have passed in Muskville, right? Similar to how the sun is moving much slower than the Earth, Muskville moves extremely slower. That 3 days in Muskville, 3 perceived days in Muskville is 2 days on Earth, which Einstein's theory of relativity told us is 100% possible. And there's parts of the universe that we know move at different paces based on their density. Okay. We come back to Earth through his time travel or through a space travel machine. Okay. How much time has passed for us? 3 days. How much older are our friends here on Earth? 2 years. How much older are we? 3 days, right? Because we're at a point in the universe where time was moving much slower. So therefore, while it's moving here on Earth much faster, vis-a-vis the Muskville, our fictional planet, we've only lived 3 days, and our body's only aged 3 days, and we've only gone through 3 days of experience. But here on Earth, they've gone through 2 years. That builds up this idea on how different parts of the universe are moving at different speeds. Now, based on this concept, let's say we're standing on the Ramban's speck, or the Big Bang Theory's speck, whosever name you want to give it. This speck that has everything in it that you need to create the world before it explodes and starts to expand. Very dense, obviously, and it's very small and very compacted together in a major way. How do you think time moves on that speck vis-a-vis mankind's perspective? Well, I'll tell you Dr. Schroeder's, and really Dr. Schroeder is not basing this on anything else than modern cosmetology, the modern physics, not cosmetology, that's the study of makeup, isn't it? I'm getting that word wrong. Correct me on the scientific word. If Dr. Emmerman's here, give me the right word. Whatever it is, based on physics, he's pulling from every single scientific book you can look at to say that on that speck, so to speak, the relationship of time to Earth, if Earth was also there when that speck was there, so to speak, is 1 to 10 to the 12th power, meaning one day on Earth would be a million days on that speck. Okay? This is modern science. This isn't Torah here. This isn't Rabbi Landis telling you something from a rabbinical work. You can look it up in scientific works and works of physics. This is modern science that they've studied the theory of relativity vis-a-vis the Big Bang and the original speck, as we're calling it tonight. The relative time on said speck to our time as we know it is one day on Earth would equal a million days on that speck, or 1 times 10 to the 12th power. Now, okay, here's where if I haven't lost you yet, I hope that you'll at least wake up for this point. If I have lost you, because this is the main point that I want to take out of Dr. Schroeder. And again, if you really want to delve into this with all the equations and the science and the Jewish sources that back it up, get Genesis and the Big Bang and check it out. Do your math. Divide a million, 1 times 10 to the 12th power by 365. How many years do you get? Roughly 16 billion. Now, what does that mean? That means the Torah is given to mankind, right? This is made very clear in a lot of our rabbinical sources and a lot of our midrashim, that there are even arguments between Moses and the angels as to between the angels and the Almighty as to if the Torah should be given to Moshe or if they should be able to hold on to it. The Torah is for mankind. It's for people. It's from a human perspective. So when we say that creation, even though we're not really supposed to delve into it unless we can do it the right way, we were told it happened in 6 days. What does that mean? That means 6 days from man in an earthbound perspective. That's how long creation took. But how long did it take in a cosmic perspective? From the perspective, so to speak, of the universe, of the density of the universe, or if you want to do it another way, from the furthest out place in the universe, right? Because that's another edge of this equation. How long is 1 day on the earth vis-a-vis this speck, or the furthest place expanded in the universe? Well, 1 day is approximately, like we said, a million days. So it comes out to be your 16 billion years if you take 6 days. So 6 days, right? 6 times a million days divided by 365 equals 16 billion. So what Dr. Schroeder essentially has done is taken our traditional Jewish sources, which give a lot of room to say that when we talk about 1 day of creation, that's 1 day vis-a-vis mankind in a completed world. But when we talk about the Almighty, we're talking about his clock, so to speak, in a cosmic perspective of the whole universe, or as Dr. Schroeder would posit, on that speck, or the furthest out place in the universe. And the relative time is 1 to 1 million, which if you take 6 of those such days, you're going to get 16 billion. Again, if I didn't lose you, if I lost you, I'm sorry. If I didn't lose you and you want to know more on this, check out the book Genesis and the Big Bang. But what it essentially tells us is that the creation, there's not really a discrepancy. If we really understand the Torah, as the Torah is very cryptic, it tells us very little. And our rabbinical literature makes it clear that there's very more. Then the place to look is Kabbalah, and that's only if it can be done right. And then we start to take little tidbits of that and line that up with modern science. We really see pretty quickly that our discrepancy falls away. And it's just some fascinating stuff. Again, if you're interested in the science of it, you're interested in going into depth, see Dr. Gerald Schroeder's book. Now, let's bring it home now. Again, if I lost you, tune back in, because we're gonna move on from this topic and get a few more points here. So the Ramban and the Maharal and other what I would say, the Kabbalistic writers have written in a way that we can grab little pieces of Kabbalah even without going deep into it, talk extensively about how the creation story is really describing on a certain level the spiritual linchpins of creation. In fact, the Maharal goes as far as to say as the Almighty created the whole world, and then he created mankind. And once mankind came into it and could have that relationship with the Almighty, then it all, so to speak, popped out, right? It came out from under the set, right? It was all ready to go. He reveals the curtain, and here's the finished world. Okay, but bottom line is we're left a lot of room to be able to say what we're saying here. But there's an important point I want to put out. there because, as I mentioned, Big Bang is a working scientific theory, maybe even someone called a fact at this point, that tells us that the world had a beginning and is expanding and will eventually burn out and have an end. But what it doesn't tell us is where the world comes from, right? Science doesn't tell us anything about that. In other words, where did that speck come from? Like that should bother us at some level. So some scientists would say, oh, that speck was always there. But that doesn't work because what causes that speck to expand and explode or bang out, right? Big bang out is all the pressure, the density of the energy in the speck that eventually that causes it to boom. So it couldn't have been that it was always there because then it would have blown up a long time ago. Like wrap your head around that for a while, right? It would have blown up a long time ago. Why it takes so long to blow up, right? It could have always been there if the explosion, if the Big Bang was caused by the pressure inside, it had to have come from somewhere, right? It couldn't have just always been there and then exploded. So where did it come from? So the question is, we essentially are saying that physicality, matter, time, space, and matter, all tied together according to Einstein, had to have a beginning. What existed before that beginning? In other words, what existed before the beginning of physicality, the beginning of matter, the beginning of the physical world? What was there before? Well, the non-physical, right? That's all that was there. If the physical had yet to come into being, it must be that all there was non-physical. Okay. So by process of elimination, the physical had to have come from the non-physical, right? I mean, just by process of elimination. If before there was physical, there was only non-physical, and the physical came from somewhere, what caused the physical to get here? Well, it had to be caused by the non-physical, by process of elimination. We call that non-physical the Almighty, right? And we call that action Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim es haaretz, right? The beginning of that speck was Bereshis bara Elokim, the beginning of the creation story. Now, we can go through this a little bit of a different, one of my teachers, we had him speak in the 10 steps, Rabbi Orlovsky, he has a cute exercise that he goes through to prove this point. He says that we're given in the Torah different attributes of the Almighty. And one of the attributes we're given is emes, that the Almighty is true. In other words, if we want to understand an aspect of the Almighty, we can understand the Almighty is true. Now, what's truth? Truth is a concept, right? It's a concept. Concepts are, at some level, non-physical beings, right? So is it true that I'm sitting here today in Cleveland, Ohio, talking to you on Zoom? Yes, it's true. Will it be true 100 years from now that I was sitting here tonight on April 13th talking to you via Zoom? Yes. Was it true 100 years ago that I will be sitting here today on April 13th speaking to you via Zoom? Yes. It hadn't happened yet, but it was true. Is it true here on Earth? Yes. Is it true on Mars? Yes. Is it true on Alpha Centauri? That's a star. Yes. All true. That gives us a concept of the non-physical, right? Because non-physical is not bound by space, time, and matter. So therefore, it's everywhere, past, present, future, all at the same time. That's the non-physical world. So non-physical had to predate physical, right? Because physical starts time and space. No physical, no time, no space, no matter, non-physical. So where that spec cover had to come from something non-physical, we call that non-physical the Almighty, right? Hashem, Elohim, Shakai, to pick your name. Each name describes a different aspect, right? Maimonides writes that as Jews, we don't believe in God, right? We don't believe in God. Meaning what? Meaning when we put names onto the concept of the Almighty, and that's why I love the English translation, the Almighty, because it's the one that really defines it the best for me. But when we put names on God, we're really just trying to quantify and qualify for our minds different aspects of his being. But really, it's too great for us to understand. And we really shouldn't put qualifiers and names onto, so to speak, the Almighty. But the Almighty Creator is what we call God, what we call Hashem, all these names. That was the non-physical that predated the physical, that we attribute the creation of that speck, Bereshis bara Elokim, to him, and therefore that is by process of elimination the concept of what we call creation ex nihilo. Something from nothing. In Hebrew, yesh ma'ayin. Now, how exactly did he do that? Not sure. If I could figure that out, I get a much better paying job, but that's the concept of creation ex nihilo. Okay, I want to just touch briefly before we wrap up and then get to any more questions you might have on the concept of evolution, because we mentioned it a little bit here and there, but I want to at least touch on it. Now, one thing I want to say for starters, and I have there is C on the outline if you're following along, but the theory of evolution, there's no contradiction between anything we've said. In other words, if evolution is in fact a law, well, okay, so that you can just say that is the process that God used to create the world, right? The single cell organisms became multi-cell organisms, and they became these, and they became these, and the fish became amphibious, and all the different developments in the order of species. You could say that, right? But I would just throw out there that there are a lot of holes in evolution. Again, don't want to go too deep into it tonight. There are issues with the fossil record, which is much more complete now than when Darwin looked at it 170 years ago. But there is still, in the fossil record, we see different species that evolutionists would say evolved from each other in the same layers, and different questions that do pop up with the concept of evolution. And really, the main issue I have with evolution, again, great theory, should be studied. I think there's some holes in it. I think in many ways it was more of a cultural acceptance 170 years ago when it came out than a scientific acceptance. And even now with the advancements, I think there's still some holes to accept this as the absolute law. But bottom line is this, is that for the evolutionists or the scientists in general to believe that life as we know it on this planet came from a complete random situation of facts, random situation of events. I'll quote the famous quote from Fred Hoyle that I have here in the outline. The chance that higher life forms might have emerged in this way is comparable to the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from the materials therein, right? In other words, we look at the world, and the world has what we call an intelligent design to it. I mean, you just look at it, it's fascinating, right? The whole world is fascinating. You just look outside and you appreciate every aspect of creation, and appreciate the fact that, if you live in Baltimore this year, you're going to be invaded by cicadas that go under the ground for 17 years or something like that, and then only hatch after 17 years and live for only 1 month and totally take over your life and eat all your trees and all that, and then go back for 17 years, lay their eggs and their descendants can come back 17 years later, right? It's amazing, intelligent design. And then we talk about the human being as many would argue, but I still hold the most advanced life form on this planet. Just to look at it, again, I think Dr. Emmerman's here, and I know he's always fascinated by the subject as a physician, but just the design of the human body and everything entailed in the human body, and the fact that our bodies work the way it works, and the fact that we respond to food in the way that we respond, and the fact that when we eat certain things, we feel a certain way, and certain things happen. It's what we call intelligent science. It's absolutely fascinating. So the issue and the discussion of whether it's evolution or science in general, and we take, so to speak, God out of the picture, which the other option, if you take God out of the picture, is to say it's all random. I don't think there's an in-between option, right? Either there's a creator with an intelligent design, or it is all random, and we were just really lucky to get to where we are today. The question is, which one's more dogmatic to believe in? And I'll leave that as a rhetorical question, but we just have to study the fascinating aspects of this world to really appreciate the design. And by appreciating the design, you can appreciate the designer. Now, I want to say one last thing before we wrap it up and open the floor to any more questions. I threw a lot at you, right? And I know a lot of it could be very confusing, and even some of it I was confused myself, and I was the one teaching. But I want to give a more, so to speak, simplistic understanding of this concept of 6 days of creation, and that is like this. If we've ever experienced the miracle of childbirth, and it is truly a miracle, either firsthand or secondhand, or we've just heard about it, it's absolutely miraculous. I mean, just think about it for a moment. You take an embryo, right? A fetus that is in utero. So that fetus is living in an environment where it is completely submerged in a bag of fluid. It doesn't breathe as we know breath, right? It doesn't eat as we eat. It gets its sustenance through this umbilical cord that attaches to what we will later call the belly button, right? It goes in through its stomach and attaches to this thing called the placenta, which gets its nourishment by the food that the mother eats, right? And then we have a human being who on the outside, post-utero or post-birth, needs to eat, needs to drink, needs to breathe, right? To be able to survive. If you don't do any of those things, I wouldn't recommend it, but you won't last very long. You take a human being and, so to speak, try and put it into an amniotic sac and try to put it in utero. How long will that human being last? Well, the average human being can hold their breath for about 30 seconds to 2 minutes. So right away, then you won't have very long. I think you can survive without water for 1 to 2 days, maybe without food, 7 days, I think they say. But suffice it to say, the average human being is not going to make it that long in an amniotic sac, right? You're just not. Take a baby or a fetus and bring it into the world as it is in utero. It's also not going to survive, right? It doesn't have lungs yet. The lungs are collapsed. It doesn't have the ability to eat. It's getting its nourishment through that umbilical cord going into its stomach, right? It wouldn't survive. In fact, at that moment of childbirth, when the baby starts screaming and you're looking at that baby, the second it comes out, it's actually pretty scary because you see that the baby is turning purple. And I don't know if you ever saw it. I never saw it with any of my children, but the concept they hit the baby, try and get the baby to cry if the baby's not crying. Now, the reason for that is because through that crying, that forces the baby to take its first breath. And through that first breath, that blows up their lungs for the first time. I'd imagine you get one of those inflatable balls, you take out the box, you blow it up for the first time. That's what happens to the baby when it takes its first breath after it comes out of the mother's womb. And then by taking that first breath, certain things close up, right? So the certain things close up, certain other things open up that makes it that now has to breathe, or before it didn't have to breathe, and changes the physiology of that baby. So the baby can now survive in the world as we know it. A miracle in front of our eyes. So we have, so to speak, we have the human world and what we'll call the uterus world, right? The gestation world. Totally different worlds. A human can't survive in the womb, and a baby really can't, or a fetus, can't survive in the world. And it's that miracle of childbirth that we see before our eyes that transitions the baby from a fetus to a human to be able to survive. Two different worlds. You can't judge the uterus based on this world, and you can't judge this world based on the uterus. Think about creation like that. 6 days of creation, that was the world in utero, so to speak. Totally different laws of nature, totally different situation before the world is complete. Now we live in a completed world. So to go back and judge the world based on what we see today, well, that's using completed world philosophy and science to look back at the uterine world science and knowledge. And it's just so to the baby and the mother, totally different world. So that's a simplistic way to understand it, and why we see our sages break it out, and the Torah breaks it down to a totally different category. 6 days of creation, then the world as we know it. Because it was the 6 days of creation were the world in utero, but we saw this concept from Dr. Schroeder about how really, if you delve into a little bit of Kabbalah and a lot of physics, it all lines up pretty well. I'll say one last thing, and then we'll wrap up and we'll end with questions. I still did not answer the question we started with of 5,781 years from what? I said it a little bit, but I didn't go into it. It's 5,781 years from what? From the creation of Adam and Eve. If we open up a Chumash and look at those 31 verses, or really after those 31 verses where we get more into the story of Adam and Eve were civilized people, right? They were living in this utopian society, the Garden of Eden. And then eventually, don't survive there very long, a few hours, and they're expelled and they go out into the world. And we seem to be interacting with Adam and Chava, with Adam and Eve, not as Neanderthal, not as prehistoric, but as civilized human beings, right? Adam is not created as the baby we described before. Adam's maybe, a 23-year-old man. Eve is, maybe a 19-year-old girl, right? They fall in love, get married, have kids, but it's a completed world. They're born into this completed world. He looks around, he sees trees that are trees, mountains, fossil fuels, everything ready to go for him. He's born complete, he's created complete in a completed world. So we understand that 5,781 years is creation of mankind, civilization as we know it. That's essentially how we understand it, because as we go on from the stories of Adam and Eve, we're dealing with civilizations, right? Right away, we're dealing with civilizations, and that's the whole story of the Torah, we're dealing with civilizations. Spaced out again, I know by more years, but we're talking about the story of civilizations. That's what is going on in the Torah. So exactly how, again, that fits in with the Neanderthals and evolution and science, again, I'll leave that to Dr. Schroeder to go more deep into if you want to. But one thing is certain. There's a big debate among anthropologists, those are people who study civilizations, is how long civilization as we know it has been around. And if you Google it, most answers you'll get will be 6,000 years, 7,000 years, again, right around in the category of our 5781. So I believe that when we talk about 5781, since the creation of mankind, we're talking about the creation of Adam and Eve, who are introduced to us as the beginning of civilization as we know it. Again, the Kabbalistic writings, Dr. Schroeder can deal with what came before that. Prehistoric man, we have the concept of Enosh, which is before Adam. Enosh was probably, we can safely translate that. There's an Enosh that came later, but maybe there's an Enosh before. Maybe it was more of a Neanderthal. Again, I'll leave that to the Kabbalists to dive into. But at least that's what we're counting from. 5781 is from the creation of civilized man. That's the year we're in. And as Jews, that's where we start history. Because as Jews, we're not just concerned about our story, which starts with Abraham 2,000 years after this, but we're concerned with all of mankind. And that's our place in the world, to be concerned with all of mankind. So as we continue our studies with history next week and throughout the next number of weeks, we're going to first start off with a big focus on mankind in general. Over the next week, we're going to talk about a little bit about the creation of man. Then we're going to get into the Great Deluge, the Great Flood, and then eventually we'll meet Avraham and start to talk specifically about the creation of the Jewish people. But we don't count from the beginning. We don't count from Mount Sinai, 1313 BCE. That's not where we're counting from. We don't count from when the Jews entered Israel. We don't count from when the temple was built. No, we count from the creation of man, because as Jews, we are concerned with all of mankind. I thank you so much for paying attention. I know this was pretty heavy stuff. And next week, we'll continue on with the story of creation. And right now, I'm going to jump into any questions, comments. I'm going to check here the chat box, see what we have here. So Deanne says something about time and context of the speed of light. Yes, speed of light plays heavily into this. But it's all, again, if you want to understand Dr. Schroeder, understand the speed of light too. That plays into part of it as well. So, okay, any other questions, comments, concerns, good jokes, bad jokes? Okay. Well, I thank you all for coming. Again, feel free to follow up with me during the week. On the outline, I put my cell phone number. You can text, WhatsApp, try to call. I often don't answer the phone just because I'm usually in meetings or working the whole day, but I will get back to you if you want to talk on the phone. So feel free to text, WhatsApp, email, Facebook, whatever. And more than happy to continue this discussion out of this class. And I look forward to next week when we talk about specifically the creation of mankind, and we'll move on there to the generations from man until the great flood. I thank you all for coming. Dan, you got a question there? Oh, you're muted, so unmute yourself. Oh, you're gonna type it in. My telephone number here. I'll put it in the chat box. 1 second. Again, text will usually get a faster answer than calling, but that's my phone number there for anyone who would that was Dr. Emmerman. Oh, Dan, you had a different question, or that was what you were waiting for? Oh, you're unmuted. There you go.
I am muted. I think I have read a commentary that says that when Adam and Eve were sent out of the garden, he came out of the womb. And that's in reference to the Garden of Eden, but I don't know the source, and it was a long time ago. But when I look at the 6,000 years of man or civilization that we started history from, it, and then I think Isaiah talks about can people become a nation in one day, and sort of like some birthing pains, these footsteps of Mashiach, etc. It seems like to me that it's another allusion to a birthing process at the 6,000 years when we finally get to that time. So although it's like in the Adam came out of the Garden of Eden, it seems like we have another birth process to be born again here at the end of this time period. I see two, like this civilization is a womb. I don't know why, but that's how I read. I just feel like that, and I see that in the prophets as well. Do you see anything like that?
Yeah, well, that's not that far off. In other words, if we connect last week's session to this week's session, where we talked about the 6 days of creation corresponding to the 6,000 years of Jewish history, then that's very much what we're talking about. Because in our, so to speak, creation, we are in a process of working from the world as we know it, which is what we call the post Garden of Eden reality, and we want to get back to the concept of what we call Adam Rishon Kodem Echet. We want to get back to the world of the Garden of Eden. That's what we're working towards. When we talk about the Messianic era either is or is the forerunner of the world and Eden resynthesized. Now, this is we're going to really delve into more next week when we talk about the man in Garden of Eden and the expulsion from Eden. That'll be next week's topic, but we will delve into that as far as how that plays into the greater story of the world. But very much so that I think there's a lot of connection between the original creation story and the history they've gone through to try and bring the world back to essentially where we started. So very good, thank you. Okay, if there's nothing else, we'll call it a night and look forward to best email address. Sorry, let me get that in here. And by the way, this is all on the top of the outline as well. So if you have that outline from the top of the chat box, I'll repost that as well. That also has my my contact information. So let me get, whoops, no, let's not let me slide. What am I doing wrong here? Here we go. There we go. Okay, there's the outline for tonight. That also has my contact information. Okay, everybody have a great evening.
Comment.
Yeah, go for it.
Because I like to think about these things. I always have. And when I was first thinking about these 6 days or the 5 days preceding the creation of man, one day I was debating about could they have been longer periods of time than 24 hours? And I realized that on the first day, Hashem created light. But it doesn't say that he created the moon and the sun and the stars until which day? The fourth day.
Right, and we didn't even get into that, and but that's a great point. If we define day as 24 hours, and that's defined as having the sun, and the sun wasn't there to the fourth day, so how are we saying the day before and it's 24 hours? But that's the point we were making, is that when we say day, it's day from a completed world, earth-centered man perspective, with the sun, with the moon, with everything. But that's not the universal perspective. The universal perspective is that dense speck, so to speak, which one day here is a million days there. So it's not that so to speak from the cosmic perspective, yeah, it's a lot more than a day, but from the earthly perspective, looking back at it, it's one day on Earth.
And just one last point, because I was like in this debate and it was sort of fun. So I tried to get people to see, even in Alaska, day and night can be extended number of days that make up how many days did they have only sun before the night comes out. And then you can really see, even in our lifetime right now, you can have a day of night and evening in Alaska that it goes beyond 24-hour period. Thank you.
Yeah, because days don't end this time of year, right? Right, very good point. Excellent. Okay, well, I thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. And again, if anyone would like to sign up to have a team for our gala exciting 33-hour event, I'm going to repost that link now to sign up to build your own team to help us out, to help us continue to do what we do. By all means, get signed up, and there'll be a lot of training provided to come on that. And I thank you all for coming, and I look forward to seeing you next week.